So for this week's tip of the week, we're going to be doing it a little bit different because I have been sick for the past week and I do not think it's very responsible for me to be around other humans at the moment. So going to avoid the gym, and I will be doing this based off of older videos of me performing the same movement pattern. So what we're going to be doing this week is actually going over a superset. So not truly an exercise tip or a hack, but mostly just explaining why this particular superset for the glutes is so effective in creating a massive amount of stimulus without really impacting too much systemic fatigue and building on that, which we don't want to do. We always want to think about how can we create the best ratio between stimulus and fatigue, and this is a great way of doing that. So here we have our machine hip thrusts, and this can also be any kind of barbell or Smith machine or something like that. Anything that we can load in a moderate rep range, thinking 10 to 20 reps, and then going into a dumbbell walking lunge. And I actually do really love the walking lunge component here because it's dynamic, and also we get the alternating movement rather than it being like a split squat where we have to go one leg at a time. So walking lunge is great. It could also be reverse lunges, but the main component here is we're looking at full shortening of the glutes from the hip thrusts and then full lengthening of the glutes from the walking lunges. So why walking lunges in particular over something like a glute focused squat or a glute focused leg press or even a hinge pattern? Why the lunges? So coming back to the focusing on high amounts of stimulus, low amounts of fatigue, we have to think about the best ROI, the best return on our investment of energy and time. So with a hip thrust, very, very low fatigue is going to be generated here, but we can generate a really solid amount of stimulus for our glutes and also train them in a range and in a position that isn't really easily accessible from other movements, and that's going to be that full contraction, that full shortening. But going into the lengthening, the stretching component of the lunges, and that's where they're going to be hanging out. So there are a lot of movements that actually take our glutes through that full stretch, that full lengthening. The problem here, though, is that most of those movements have a little bit higher injury risk and actually have a higher fatiguing component. Thinking about, like RDLs or squats, again, leg presses, those types of things where, yeah, you can load them up. You maybe can somehow reduce the risk of injury, like if you're very careful, if you're very proficient in the movements, but they're going to inevitably create a very high amount of fatigue. Whereas something like dumbbell walking lunges, they're exhausting. Yes, of course they're exhausting. They're very, very difficult. They zap your energy. But whenever looking at systemic fatigue variables and factors that are going to be influenced by that, so notably thinking about overreaching components and biofeedback over not even just a day, but over the course of a week or even a mesocycle, full block, what is going to be adding up to potentially dampen our ability to progress. The dumbbell walking lunge is not going to be overly influential there. So we can take a movement like the machine hip thrust here where we're getting full shortening, hard contractions, overloading that contraction, that shortened position of our glutes, which again, pretty hard to hit. And then we can go right into a glute focused walking lunge where we're taking longer strides. We're really focusing on that hip flexion component rather than the knee flexion, and going to fully shorten and then fully lengthen. And by doing that, we're creating a massive amount of stimulus for our glutes without overly doing it from the fatiguing component of the entire system. So that's why this superset in particular is absolutely so powerful for creating glute potential growth. So if you have not given this a shot, I highly recommend it. And this is actually one of those principles that carries over into other body parts, other muscle groups as well. So you can always focus on shortened to lengthened supersets, no matter what body part you're looking at. And these actually have just massive growth potentials.